Her true story. From New Mexico. My stepdad abused me every day. You're nothing, just a scared little girl. No one will believe you. He said that every morning. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, spoken with the same confidence a man uses when he blesses his coffee. Royce meant it, and for a long time, I believed it. My name is Beatrice. I was born in a dry little corner of New Mexico, where the sun cracked the soil and secrets baked into the silence. I lived with my mother, Frances, in a small, single-story house that used to smell like cinnamon. I say used to because when Royce moved in, everything changed. I was 8 years old when he married my mother. I remember her white dress. It was borrowed and didn't quite fit. She smiled at him like he was her second chance. He didn't smile back. He just nodded like she was a transaction he'd closed. That was the first time I felt it, a chill, even in the July heat. I didn't call him Dad. At first it was Mr. Royce, then just Royce. Eventually, I called him nothing at all, because silence seemed safer. The first few weeks were quiet. He was polite in public, even stiffly so. People said, "Francis finally found a good man." He worked as a mechanic and wore pressed shirts on Sundays. But at home, he had rules. My hair had to be tied back, my shoes lined up, my voice kept low, and then he started locking my door. I remember the night. My mother had left for a night shift at the diner. I was coloring on the floor, and he came into my room without knocking. "It's late," he said. "Girls who stay up grow up too fast." He pulled the blankets back on my bed. I hesitated. He stepped closer. "Get in," he said. I did. Then he walked out, and I heard the key turn. Click. I ran to the door. It wouldn't budge. I banged. I cried. Nothing. He unlocked it at 6 the next morning. Didn't say good morning. Just looked at me and said, "You're nothing, just a scared little girl. No one will believe you." That became the rhythm of my childhood. At first, I thought he was just strict. Then I realized he was dangerous. He didn't hit me, not then, but he didn't have to. The locking, the watching, the way he stood too close when I brushed my teeth, it was enough. I tried to tell my mom. One morning, I followed her into the kitchen. She was frying eggs. "Mom," I said, "Royce locked my door last night. I couldn't get out." She didn't turn around. "He's just trying to keep you safe," she said. "From what?" She turned then. Her eyes were tired. "From yourself." I opened my mouth to argue, but she slammed the spatula down. "Don't talk back. That man puts food in your mouth. Be grateful." I learned that day that my mother didn't want the truth. She wanted peace, and I was the price. Royce grew bolder after that. He'd pull my ponytail if I spoke out of turn, slam a cupboard door if I didn't say thank you. Once, I spilled water on the kitchen floor. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left a mark. When I showed my mother, she said I bruised easily. "You're dramatic," she said. I stopped telling her things. But the worst night came when I was 9. It was Sunday, church day. I wore a pale blue dress that used to be my cousin's. Royce said it was too short. After we got home, he called me into the living room. "You think you can walk around looking like that?" he growled. "It's just a dress." Before I could finish, his hand struck my cheek. I stumbled backward, hit the side table, and fell. My ears rang. I looked up and saw my mother standing in the hallway. She'd seen everything. I waited, in voce certa had ti, for her to scream, to cry, to come to me. She did none of those things. Instead, she walked over, pulled me up by the arm, and hissed, "Apologize to him." I couldn't speak. "Do it," she snapped. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Royce folded his arms. "She'll learn." That night, he locked my door again. The next morning, same ritual, same words. "You're nothing, just a scared little girl. No one will believe you." I stopped being a child that day. I started counting things instead. The seconds it took him to walk down the hall. The minutes my mother spent on the phone when she should have been watching. The number of bruises I could hide under long sleeves. I remember thinking that if I could just count high enough, maybe one day it would stop. But it didn't, not for 60 years. People think abuse is all bruises and black eyes. But the worst kind, the kind that stays in your bones, is quieter than that. Royce didn't hit me often. He didn't need to. He built a cage with rules and shame and looks that told me I was dirt before he ever raised his hand. By the time I was 10, he'd decided what I wore, what I ate, when I could speak. My mom called it structure. I called it prison. He chose my clothes each morning. Long skirts, baggy shirts, anything that covered my shape. Girls with curves invite trouble, he said. Trouble, in his mouth, meant me. I wasn't allowed to have snacks unless he offered. My allowance came in folded bills that I had to count in front of him. Every cent accounted for. And friends? He didn't like girls who giggled too much or wore makeup like whores. One by one, my classmates stopped inviting me over. I couldn't explain why. What was I supposed to say? My stepdad inspects my breath when I get home to see if I've been talking too much? I kept my mouth shut. But Miss Janice, my 6th grade teacher, noticed. She had big, curly hair, a warm voice, and a laugh that reminded me of songs. One afternoon, she called me in after class. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Are you okay?" I nodded. Too quickly, she frowned. "You flinched when Mr. Young tapped your shoulder today." I looked down. My nails had little moons of dirt under them. I picked at them. "I just don't like surprises." "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you can talk to me about anything." Something inside me cracked. I hadn't heard that tone in years. So I told her. Not everything, just enough. The door locking, the silence, the bruises that came and went. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "That's not right, none of it." I left her classroom lighter than I'd felt in years. 2 days later, she was gone. "Family emergency," the school secretary said, but I knew better. Royce came home that night with fire in his eyes. "Did you think she wouldn't tell the principal?" he barked. "You think you're clever." He didn't hit me that night. He didn't need to. He stared at me so long, so hard, that I wished he would. The next morning, the lock on my door had 2 bolts instead of 1. My mother didn't ask why. By then she was more shadow than woman. She moved through the house like a ghost, always tired, always tense. I stopped calling her mom, not out loud, not in my head. She had become her. Her eyes followed Royce like she needed permission to blink. I once asked her why she never smiled anymore. She said, "I smile when you behave." I learned to stop asking questions. Still, something inside me wanted out. Not escape, just air. A whisper of it. I started writing. Late at night, under the covers, by flashlight. I wrote poems, journal entries, prayers. I wrote letters. Some to God, some to no one. And then I wrote a real letter. To the sheriff. I didn't name names. Just described what was happening. A man is locking up his stepdaughter. He controls everything. She's scared. I hid it in the back of my math book. A week later, my mother found it. I came home from school to see her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter opened in front of her, like a dead bird. She didn't say anything at first, just tapped her fingernail on the paper. "Where were you going to send this?" she finally asked. I didn't answer. She stood up, walked over, and slapped me so hard my cheek burned. "Do you know what this would do to us?" I touched my face. "To him?" she shouted. I looked up. "What about what he's done to me?" She froze. Then she picked up the letter, ripped it in half, then again and again, until it was snow on the floor. "If you ever try anything like this again," she said, "don't come crying to me. Don't come calling me anything." She left the pieces there for me to clean up. That night, I went to my room and didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the ceiling and mouthed the words, "I believe me." It became a ritual. Every time Royce called me nothing, every time my mother called me ungrateful, I whispered, "I believe me." I said it under my breath when I brushed my teeth. I said it when I stirred the soup. I said it when I folded his laundry, staring at the socks of the man who broke me in ways that left no visible scars. I believe me. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it kept me going until I could make someone else believe me too. I was 17 when I ran. By then, my world had shrunk to the 4 corners of that house. Royce's rules were law. My mother was his echo, and I had become a ghost in my own skin. But ghosts can still slip through cracks. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day that smells like burned toast and cigarette smoke. I had $22.00 saved from school lunch money I never spent, folded in half and hidden in a tampon box under my bed. I left just after 3:00 p.m., when I knew Royce would be in the garage and my mother would be napping with her back to the door. I took a canvas bag with 2 shirts, a toothbrush, and the money. I walked. Then I ran. Then I hitched a ride with a trucker who didn't ask too many questions. By midnight, I was in Albuquerque. It was louder than I expected. Lights everywhere. Cars that didn't stop for pedestrians, people who looked right through you even when you stared straight at them. I found a women's shelter 3 blocks from the Greyhound station. They gave me soup, a cot, and a plastic bracelet with my name on it. It felt like a wristband at the fair, except this one said I belonged somewhere safe. I stayed for 4 days. On the 5th morning, 2 police officers showed up. "Beatrice Leyland?" one of them asked. I nodded. "Your stepfather reported you missing. Said you're a minor." "I'll be 18 in 6 months, I said. The other cop shook his head. "That's not how the law works." They drove me back in the back of the cruiser. I didn't cry. I just watched the desert roll by and wondered if I'd ever see the city again without handcuffs. Royce was waiting on the porch when we pulled up. "Thank God," he said, shaking the officer's hands like a grieving father on a TV show. "We were so worried." He even pretended to tear up. I didn't say a word. The officers left. My mother hugged me once, quickly, like checking a box. Then Roy said, "Get in the house." I did, but I didn't go to my room. He grabbed me by the arm and yanked me toward the basement door. "You think you're grown, huh?" he hissed. The door creaked open. Cold air wafted up. "You don't get to walk away from this family," he said. Then he shoved me down the stairs. I caught myself on the railing. The door slammed shut. The lock turned. I heard his boots thud upstairs. And then silence. There was no window, no light, just dust and concrete and the smell of rust. The first few hours, I tried to stay calm. I counted seconds, breathed in 4s, did everything the shelter counselor told me to do when I got scared. But night came, and with it, the thirst. No water, no food, just echoes. My stomach growled so loud I thought rats would come looking. I pulled an old sheet from a broken couch and wrapped it around myself. On the 2nd day, I screamed. Not words, just sound. Raw animal sound. It bounced off the walls and came back smaller, and I realized no one was listening. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a rusted pen cap I'd found earlier. No ink, just sharp plastic. I walked to the mirror hanging crooked on the wall. It was dusty, cracked, and old, like me, and I began cutting. Not my skin, my hair, 1 handful at a time. Snip, snip. Each cut was a scream I couldn't voice. Each strand that fell to the floor was a piece of the girl he thought he owned. I hacked it until it was jagged and uneven, sticking up like broken wheat. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. The 3rd day, he opened the door. "Ready to apologize?" he said. I stood up, holding a bundle of my hair like a trophy. He stared at me. "What the hell did you do?" "I cut it," I said. "So you can't touch it." His jaw twitched. He reached for me, and I flinched. But he didn't hit me. Not that time. He just backed away. "You'll regret that," he muttered. "Maybe." But for once, it was my choice. He let me shower, but not alone. He stood outside the bathroom door, counting to make sure I didn't stay too long. My mother said nothing. Didn't ask where I'd been. She just handed me a hairbrush and walked away. That night, I looked in the mirror. My hair was a mess. My face was pale. But in my eyes, something new had sparked. I had left once. I could leave again. And next time, I wouldn't come back. I'm 78 now. I live alone in a small house at the edge of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Yes, that's really the name of the town. Some days it feels like the whole state is built on both. I don't have family. Not anymore. My mother passed years ago. We hadn't spoken since I was 23. Royce lived longer, though I never visited. The last I heard, he moved to a small ranch on the outskirts of Las Cruces. Still sharp, still walking. He always was too mean to die early. I've never married, never had children. Not because I didn't want to. I just never found someone I trusted enough to build a life with. The kind of silence Royce built doesn't just stay in your home. It follows you like smoke in your hair, even after the fire's out. But I kept living. I worked at a grocery store until I retired. Read books, grew tomatoes. I smiled at strangers, laughed at old sitcoms. I made it through life quietly, like a song no one remembered the lyrics to. Until one Tuesday afternoon when I decided to speak. It started with a flyer at the pharmacy. Women's Support Group, Thursdays at 3 p.m. for those who have carried too much for too long. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I took it home. The following Thursday, I put on my nicest sweater, brushed my hair, and walked the 6 blocks to the community center. The room was small, warm, filled with folding chairs and soft faces. Most were younger than me, But one woman looked even older. No one asked why I was there. We went around the circle one by one. Some spoke of breakups, others of children they'd lost touch with. And then it was my turn. I hesitated. "My name is Beatrice," I said. The room waited. And then I told them, not everything, but enough. I told them about the door, the bolts, the words Royce repeated every morning. I told them how my mother called me a liar, how silence became my second skin, how I never really got free. When I finished, no one clapped, no one gasped. They were just quiet. It was the kindest silence I'd ever known. Then a voice from the back of the room broke it. "I know that name," the man said. Everyone turned. He stood up slowly, gripping the back of the chair in front of him. I knew a Royce Leland. He worked as a mechanic, attended Grace Baptist every Sunday, drove a black Ford. "That him?" I nodded. He exhaled hard. "I was the sheriff of Dona Ana County for 22 years, he said. "Retired now. But back then, I remember hearing rumors, whispers about him, but no one ever talked. No one ever reported." He looked at me, straight in the eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "You shouldn't have carried this alone." My throat tightened. I hadn't cried in years, but something in his voice, steady, not pitiful, broke through. He didn't look at me like a victim. He looked at me like a witness, a woman who survived. His name was Richard. I found that out the next day, when he showed up at my doorstep with a manila folder tucked under one arm and a bag of lemon scones in the other. "I figured you might need something sweet to go with something bitter," he said, with a gentle smile. I let him in. I wasn't used to visitors, certainly not ones who remembered my name after one conversation. He sat at my kitchen table like he'd been there 100 times. No staring, no questions about my old house or why the curtains were always drawn. Just that folder, resting like a sleeping animal between us. "I went digging last night," he said. "Old habit, I guess. Couldn't sleep." He opened the folder. Inside were reports, notes, names I hadn't seen in decades. "This is from 67, he said. "We had a string of complaints. Anonymous. Girls between 12 and 16. Nothing ever stuck. No witnesses, no names, just fear." He looked at me, then added, "I think they were trying to talk about him, your stepfather." My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the paper. The handwriting was slanted, rushed, descriptions vague, like someone had tried to scream through a whisper. "Back then," Richard continued, "if a girl didn't name names, we filed it away and moved on. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but policy is policy until someone breaks it." He tapped the folder. "This is you breaking it." I didn't know what to say. So I did what I always did when silence made me nervous. I offered coffee. He smiled again. 2 sugars, no cream. We talked for hours that day. Not just about Royce, about the town, about the years we'd both lost in different ways, about faith and trust and what it means to believe someone even when it costs you comfort. Before he left, he said, "I'm not letting this die in a drawer. You opened a door. Let's walk through it." 2 weeks later, he came back with more than a folder. He came with names. 3 of them, 3 women, all from my childhood neighborhood. One had been my classmate, Angela Thomas. Another had been the choir pianist at church, Lorraine King. The third, a girl named Maribel, who'd vanished one summer and never came back. "She lives in Santa Fe now," Richard said. "But she remembers him." He paused. "All 3 of them. They weren't sure until they heard your story. They didn't know they weren't the only ones." I felt dizzy, not from pain, but from recognition. The monster I'd tried to hide. He'd left footprints on other lives. We decided to meet. My house was small, but warm. I baked banana bread and set out the good teacups. I lit the candle I'd been saving for no reason, lavender and sage. One by one they arrived. Angela, with streaks of gray in her tight curls and hands that shook slightly. Lorraine, still wearing choir earrings. And Maribel, with her head held high and a look that said, "You will not break me again." We sat in a circle. No one spoke at first. Then Angela said, "He used to volunteer at the school on Tuesdays, said he was helping with shop class. He cornered me in the storage room once." Lorraine nodded slowly. "He offered to give me a ride home from rehearsal. I thought he was just being kind. But he locked the doors." Maribel just whispered, "I ran. That was the only thing I did right. I ran. And then They looked at me. I didn't have to explain. They already knew. I said 4 words I'd waited 60 years to say. You're not alone anymore. We cried. Not the loud kind. Not the messy kind. Just quiet tears that felt more like release than sorrow. It was like exhaling for the first time after holding your breath for a lifetime. That night, as they left, each woman hugged me tightly, not out of pity, but out of power. We had found each other in the ruins, and together we were starting to build something that looked like justice. Richard stayed behind to help me wash the cups. As he dried the last dish, he said softly, I spent decades thinking I failed those girls. You didn't fail us, I said. The world did. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. But the world just got warned. They said it couldn't happen, that no one would take an 86-year-old man to trial for crimes committed over half a century ago. But they were wrong. With Richard's help, and the testimonies of Angela, Lorraine, and Maribel, we petitioned the district attorney. The evidence wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Overlapping stories, old reports, and one survivor willing to speak under oath. The court date was set for September. It was hot that year. New Mexico hot, where the sky feels too big and the air too thin. I wore navy blue on the first day, not black. I wasn't mourning, I was testifying. Royce sat at the defense table in a wheelchair. His hair was thin, skin pale like paper, but his eyes, they were exactly the same. Cold, calculating, like he still believed he owned the room. The prosecutor began with facts, timelines, documents. Then came the witnesses. Angela cried on the stand. Lorraine's voice shook. Maribel never broke eye contact with him. And then it was my turn. I stood. My knees didn't tremble. My voice didn't falter. I looked straight ahead and told them everything. The door locks, the threats, the slap in the living room, the basement, the years of silence. When I said, he told me no one would ever believe me, I watched the jury lean in. But the real moment, the one I'll never forget, was when the prosecutor asked, why now? Why after all these years? And I answered, because justice doesn't rot with age. It waits, and it remembers. The courtroom was silent, not out of politeness, but out of reckoning. Royce's lawyer tried to paint me as confused, attention-seeking, vengeful, but the jury didn't buy it. 12 people saw through his age and his cane and his church blazer. They saw what he really was, a man who thought time could bury truth. It couldn't. After 3 days of testimony and 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty on 5 counts of aggravated abuse. The judge looked at him and said, your age is not a shield. Your past does not excuse your past. Then he sentenced him to 12 years in prison. It wouldn't be a long stay, but it would be his last. As they wheeled him out of the courtroom, he turned his head. For a moment, I thought he might speak, apologize, right? But he didn't. He just looked at me. And for once, I wasn't afraid. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just met his gaze and nodded, not in forgiveness, but in finality. Because the door he locked behind me all those years ago, I had just slammed shut on him. The church stood at the corner of 5th and La Mesa, where the bell tower cracked in the sun, and the old women still wore hats to Sunday service. It hadn't changed much in 60 years. Still had the same hymnals, still smelled of wax and dust, still had the plaque on the wall near the pulpit. The Wall of Gratitude, they called it, a carved slab of oak listing the names of generous donors and pillars of the community. Royce Leland's name had been there since 1974, right at the top, bold, clean, eternal, until now. 2 weeks after the verdict, I got a call from Pastor Helen. She'd only been leading the church a few years, young, no nonsense, the kind of woman who wore boots under her robes and read scripture like a courtroom brief. She said, Miss Beatrice, I'd like to invite you to service this Sunday. I hadn't stepped foot inside that church since I was a girl in lace socks and bruised elbows. Part of me wanted to say no, but another part, the part that had survived Royce, silence, shame, said yes. So I went. I wore gray, tied my hair back, sat in the last pew, unnoticed at first. The sermon was about truth, about cleansing what's hidden in the shadows, about justice, not just as a divine idea, but as a community responsibility. At the end, Pastor Helen cleared her throat. We have one more matter today, she said. She walked over to the plaque. I want to acknowledge that for years, This church unknowingly honored a man who caused great harm. We can't erase what he did, but we can remove his name. She took out a screwdriver, and in front of the entire congregation, she unscrewed the brass plate that read, Royce Leland. It clattered into her hand like a coin dropped into a wishing well. The silence in the room was thick. No applause, no gasps, just the sound of a wound closing. She stepped down from the pulpit and walked straight to me, handed me the plate. You can keep it, she said softly, or throw it away. Either way, it's no longer on our wall. I looked at it. The name was shiny, untouched, like it had never done anything wrong. But I knew better. I stood, walked slowly to the church kitchen, dropped the plaque into the trash. It landed with a dull thud. When I came back out, the service was over. People were milling about, murmuring. One young woman approached me, couldn't have been more than 22, long dark hair, anxious eyes. She said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I blinked. For what? That no one believed you, she said. That it took this long. Her voice cracked. My aunt, she had someone like that. But she never talked. You did. I didn't know what to say, so I touched her hand. Thank you, I whispered. She walked away, wiping her eyes. I turned back to the wall. Where his name had been was now just smooth, blank wood. No scars, no scratches, just absence. But I didn't feel empty. I felt clean. Some people think healing is loud, explosive, cinematic, but sometimes it's quiet. It's a name removed, a stranger's apology. A moment where you finally look at something that once hurt, and it doesn't anymore. I left the church without looking back, because the past didn't live there anymore. These days, Sunday is my favorite day of the week, not because of church, not anymore. I haven't gone back since they took Royce's name off the wall. That was closure enough. But because of Richard. Every Sunday morning, he pulls up in front of my house in his old blue pickup truck. It runs a little loud and smells faintly of engine oil, but he keeps it clean, like him. Rough on the outside, careful underneath. He honks twice. I always wait until the second one. Old habits. Let a man wait a little if he's worth it. I open the door, step down the porch, and he opens the passenger door like it's 1953 and I'm the prom queen. "Morning, B," he says. "Morning, Sheriff." He chuckles every time. "Haven't worn that badge in 20 years. You still carry it in your posture," I say. We drive out to a diner on the highway. Sandy's place. Vinyl booths, weak coffee, the best green chili omelets in the county. The waitress knows our order before we sit. He gets extra hash browns. I get jam, not jelly. We talk about small things. The wind, the neighbor's dog, who died last week, who still hasn't. Sometimes we don't talk at all. Just eat and sit in the quiet. The good kind, not the kind I grew up with. After breakfast, we go to the nursing home. There's a woman there named Ruth who loves to play piano, even though she can't remember her own name. Richard says hello to everyone like they're old war buddies. I bring a tin of mints. The nurses call me Miss B. I don't correct them. Richard volunteers once a week, fixing things that don't need fixing, just so the residents feel seen. And I just sit with them, listen to stories that wander and loop and sometimes make no sense at all, but they're told like they matter. That's what counts. One Sunday, while we were walking out to the truck, he stopped suddenly. I turned. "Everything all right?" He looked at me, really looked, and said, "I never believed in angels." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I float when you're not looking?" He smiled. "No, but I do think God sends people to remind us what's worth standing up for. And B, that's you." I didn't cry. I haven't, not since the trial, but something deep in me softened, like a knot finally coming loose. "I was just trying to survive," I said. "And look what you did," he replied. "You outlived the devil. You opened the door for others. That's not surviving, that's leading." He drives me home before noon, always says, "See you next Sunday," like a promise. And I always answer, "You better." I sit on my porch after he leaves, sip tea, watch the sun climb over the New Mexico horizon, slow and warm, like an apology. People think justice means sirens and handcuffs, and sometimes it does. But sometimes it looks like this: a quiet porch, a clean conscience, a name removed, a plate of eggs, and someone who listens. I'm 78. I don't know how many Sundays I have left, but I do know this. He said he'd break me, but I broke the silence first. And silence, once broken, never returns the same. If you've ever been hurt and no one believed you, I'm here to say, I believe you. They don't tell you what comes after justice. They tell you to survive, to hold on, to endure until the verdict comes, until the truth is heard, until the weight is lifted. And when it finally is, you expect trumpets, a parade, some great thunderous relief. But what you get is a quiet mourning. And sometimes that's even better. The years after Royce's sentencing passed gently. He only lasted 3 more in prison before his body gave out. No funeral, no obituary, just a line in the county register, and for the first time in my life, the world didn't bend around his name. I didn't feel joy when I read it. I didn't feel hate either. Just closure, like a chapter with no more pages. But that wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of one I never thought I'd have. Richard and I grew closer in those next few years. What started as Sunday breakfasts turned into Tuesday lunches, then Friday grocery runs, then Thursday night porch talks where we didn't even pretend we had somewhere else to be. He never pushed, never pried, he just showed up. There was one evening, late summer, where the sky turned orange too early and the air smelled like rain that never came. I was sitting on the porch swing, shelling peas into a tin bowl, when he walked up holding a jar of strawberry preserves. I got these at the farmer's market, he said. They were 2 for 1, I grinned. And you couldn't possibly eat both. He sat beside me. I could, but it's better with company. We talked about nothing for an hour. The rust on the neighbor's gate, the raccoon that stole Mrs. Klein's trash can. And then, somewhere between silence and small talk, he reached over and held my hand. Not like a man trying to win something, but like someone who'd already won, just by being allowed in. You know, he said, I used to think love was for the young, for those who hadn't been broken yet. I looked at him. And now? I asked. Now I think love is for those who've survived it all and still choose to sit beside someone, just like this. We didn't speak after that. Didn't need to. The swing creaked gently beneath us. The sky turned dark, and I realized, for the first time in my life, I felt safe. Our routine changed after that. He started keeping a toothbrush at my house. I made room for his jacket in the hall closet. We didn't call it anything. Not dating, not partners, just us. My neighbors started calling him your gentleman, and I didn't correct them. He brought me roses once, yellow ones, because they don't try too hard. I made his favorite cobbler and pretended it was the last one I'd bake, just to watch him protest. Sometimes we sat in complete silence, the kind that didn't ask for conversation, just presence. Once, on a Tuesday, he kissed my temple and said, "B, if I met you 50 years ago, I would have married you." I smiled and said, "If you'd met me 50 years ago, I wouldn't have let you in the front door." He laughed. Fair enough. Life didn't become perfect. It became real. I still had nightmares sometimes. Still jolted awake at sounds I couldn't name. Still found myself looking over my shoulder when a man walked too close behind me. But now, when I woke up trembling, there was a warm hand reaching for mine in the dark. "Just me," Richard would whisper. "You're safe." And I was. One summer, the local high school invited me to speak at their Women of Courage series. I almost said no. What did I know about courage? But Richard looked me in the eye and said, "B, you didn't just survive. You turned your pain into light, and that kind of light doesn't belong in the dark." So I went. I stood in front of 50 teenage girls and told them what no one told me when I was their age, that they matter. That silence doesn't mean safety, that believing someone can be the difference between breaking and becoming. Afterward, a girl hugged me and whispered, "You made me feel seen." And that's when I knew. I hadn't just survived for myself. I'd survived for her. For all of them. The garden out back bloomed brighter that year. Richard built me a bench with our names carved underneath. We started having neighbors over for lemonade and stories that made us laugh till our sides hurt. I told my story again, on radio, in local papers, even in a podcast someone's grandson recorded. Not because I liked remembering, but because I refused to let forgetting win. One morning, on my 80th birthday, Richard brought me breakfast in bed. Burned toast, overcooked eggs, and orange juice with too much pulp. "Perfect," I said. He sat beside me, holding my hand in that same quiet way. "You know," he said, "if heaven has porches, I hope they look just like this." I smiled. with you in the rocking chair beside me, always. I don't know how much longer I have. None of us do. But I know this. He said no one would ever believe me, but someone did, and that belief changed everything. It gave me a life I didn't dare dream of. A life with coffee and laughter and slow mornings. A life where my name means more than my past. A life where I'm no longer just a story of pain, but a proof of what comes after. Healing, love, peace. Every day, I sit on my porch and watch the sun rise over New Mexico. And every day, I whispered to the wind, "You were wrong, Royce. I wasn't nothing. I was just waiting to become something more." Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where we say what others are afraid to. Because justice has no expiration date, and this grandma still has something to say.